welcome everyone, and thank you. Welcome to Erasing the Redline. First, the usual housekeeping. You are in Zoom webinar mode, which is different than Zoom meeting. You should be able to see and hear our panelists, but not each other. We'll be taking questions at the end via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to direct your questions to specific panelists if you wish. We'll get to as many as we can, but with over 300 registrations, we may not get to all of them. We're recording this and we will send you a link to this recording once it's available. And we'll also send you a list of resources, actions, and ways to engage. And that is by no means comprehensive, but it's way more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and that is encouraging. Greenville residents, please especially note our Citizens Planning Academy, which starts its next virtual session in April. We are looking for diverse applicants to participate in Upstate Forever's course designed to help Greenville residents, business owners, and neighborhood leaders understand the processes that drive local planning and land use policy decisions. There's also a link to sign up for Upstate Forever's different specialized newsletters, such as our legislative update, the water log, and several dedicated growth and planning issues. There's a link to Sustaining Way, lots of good stuff on that. I'm Shelley Robbins, the Energy and State Policy Director for Upstate Forever, and I've been with this organization more than 13 years. Our Executive Director is Andrea Cooper. Upstate Forever was founded 23 years ago, back in 1998, when attorney Brad Weich walked away from his family's law firm to continue his father Tommy Weich's legacy of protecting the Upstate's precious lands. We must acknowledge that we were founded in privilege. Most of us can't walk away from a career to do something like this, and we acknowledge that. But this organization was also born of an intense desire to leave the world a better place, to give rather than to take, to repair rather than to destroy, and to work toward an upstate that is prosperous, safe, and healthy for everyone. Now, how we articulate that work, how we frame and execute that work has changed. Conservation is often perceived as a white issue and even a luxury. Our organization, like others, has struggled to diversify its own staff and board. Without diversity, we struggle to be authentic, but we know that is a challenge. And so until we are successful at the staff and board level, until people of color don't look at us and say, well, that's a white organization, I don't feel welcome there, we will make our work representative. To do that, we're learning how to look at many issues from so many more perspectives. And I'll share an example of my journey that mirrors the organizational journey. Consider trees. Who doesn't love trees? They're awesome. They make oxygen, they cool our homes and neighborhoods. They mitigate climate change, they slow stormwater, and they're pretty. But the recent tree ordinance forced me to question my own lenses and whether they had evolved as much as I thought they had. I had to remind myself that I used to have an 80-year-old red oak tree in my front yard in Spartanburg. I forgot that trees cost money. I had to have hazard limbs trimmed. I had to have the roots carefully cut when I repaved my driveway just to protect the health of the tree. That tree, an incredibly noble canopy tree, was kind of expensive, but it was also a lot of work. I raked every few days all fall just to keep ahead of leaf accumulation year after year. I got up on a ladder, got up on the roof to clean the gutters. So I loved my expensive, labor-intensive tree, even when I griped about it. I liked what it provided me in return. But to a person of color who grew up in the South, a stately old oak tree like that might be a reminder of a legacy of terror. Or a tree like that may have crushed a roof and it took a long time to fix. My red oak did just that, but I had good insurance and I fixed it quickly. But what if I had to wait months to get it fixed and my house filled with cold and damp and mold crept in? What if I was 80 years old and on a fixed income and couldn't keep those leaves and limbs cleared? What if its roots buckled my sidewalk and made it unsafe for me to walk or bring in the groceries? So consider the urban tree as a symbol of the complexity of the issues we are dealing with as we try to unwind threads of centuries of racism and find environmental solutions today that reflect all voices. Conservation may be perceived as a white issue, but communities of color have been the most impacted by pollution and inequitable distribution of public resources. Land use planning, a tool we support, in order to reduce our growing population's impact on our air and water has a legacy of being used to concentrate communities of color in certain areas, depriving those households of the ability to build wealth and exposing them disproportionately to environmental harm. The environmental justice movement began to gel in this country in 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina, when residents fought a toxic landfill. There have been some very public EJ issues here in the upstate, such as the painfully slow cleanup of the Bramlett coal tar site in Greenville, the location of the state's second largest landfill right next to a neighborhood of color in Spartanburg, then the attempt to locate another mega landfill in Enoree, the decades of work it took to get a handle on the contamination by textile mills in a dump in the Arkwright community near Spartanburg. These can all be traced back to redlining in one form or another. And then there are the things that are happening quietly, such as moving families out of neighborhoods that have become blighted in the name of urban renewal, or underfunding public transportation and education, and even more subtle things like publishing notices of public hearings only in a newspaper with an extremely small distribution. Redlining continues today. So we are here today to push the conversation and also to listen, to help us change our organizational lens, our practices, and our advocacy to become more responsive and more reflective of the entire community we serve. We'll hear about some ongoing challenges, but also some positive change that is happening. Helping us with this is our phenomenal board member, Chris Richardson, who will introduce our panelists and ask them some strategic questions. Chris is the General Counsel and COO of BDV Solutions. He's an immigration attorney and a former US diplomat, having worked for the State Department for 7 years and being posted in Nigeria, Nicaragua, Pakistan, and Spain. He has been in high demand by the national press lately for his expertise on the Muslim travel ban and on the need for increased diversity within the State Department. Chris, this panel is your gift to us, and we cannot thank you enough. Take it away.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for your warm remarks as well. And thanks to Upstate Forever for allowing us to have this opportunity. I really think that this is the beginning of a long conversation that we all need to have. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, of course, and I saw how much change affected our area and is rapidly affecting the entire state of South Carolina, and particularly here in the upstate. But those changes and our challenges are very much rooted in our past. And so this panel is an opportunity not only to talk about redlining and pollution, but to understand what do we mean by the phrase environmental justice. For too long, even the word environment, the environment meant something different to different people. But the environment cannot be separated from justice. The environment is all around us, in the air we breathe, the rivers that we drink from, and the food that we eat. And that environment is measured by those things that affect the most vulnerable and the most oppressed in our community. And so I'm a firm believer that the old cliche is true, that we're each our brother's keeper. And so the future of our community, of our country, and of our planet rests on our ability to be bold, to be people of action, but more importantly, to listen and to learn. And the way that we're going to do that is to have this kind of conversation that we're having, such as on this panel today. So our first panelist and the first person I'm going to talk to is actually Councilman Michael Brown, who is the Executive Director of Sustaining Way. He's also the Executive Director of the Spartanburg NAACP. His focus has been on combating food swamps and food deserts in affected communities. And so thank you, Professor, thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here with me today and taking my questions.
Chris, you're trying to be fortuitous, Professor. Yeah, all right.
Well, you are a lawyer, so lawyers are professors. I like to tell
everything's possible.
That's right. So tell me a little bit about what got you involved in the issue of food and food systems, and how do you think that affects the environment?
Well, Chris, as you know, practicing law can be a very stressful and oftentimes a sedentary type of practice that we can engage in for employment. So a number of years back, I found myself on the wrong side of health, and I just changed the way that I was eating. I became a person that sought a plant-based diet, and after that, I just opened my eyes up to a number of things, and one being sustainable agriculture. And so with that, it was just an opportunity for me to take an expanded look at the communities that I served, obviously as a member of the county council. And in particular, Shelley references an area that I grew up in. I grew up in the shadow of that chemical fertilizing plant that over time infected our soil and compromised so many people in terms of their health. And so with that, I began to take a closer look, not only as a member of the community, but definitely as a person that was representing the interests of the impacted community that I was elected to serve.
Okay. And, you know, you talk a lot about being a political leader, and you're such a prominent political leader in the upstate. Do you believe that there are racial lines on the issue of the environment, and how do we close those gaps, build bridges toward one another? What do you think would be a strategy that we can bring people together on this issue of the environment? Because as Shelley referenced, the very idea of the environment for a lot of people means different things.
That's true. You know, I think, you know, there's commonality that can be found amongst different communities. And for obviously one of the things that we focus on at Sustaining Ways is healthy lifestyle practices. And so that can encompass a number of things we do at our demonstration site. Clearly the opportunities to seek to educate people on issues that particularly affect your health, but other issues that we know over time will have an effect on us all. Affordable housing, what does that look like? Of course, the negative indices that can be associated with people that have to make a decision on, do I pay for my medicine today? Do I go or try to have someone go to the local convenience store to get me something to eat? Or do I have to pay this very high energy bill? And so those are the things that I think, regardless of where we find ourselves on that particular spectrum of color, those are common things that cross over to many different communities. And so those are common ground issues that I know we can have a chance to work on.
All right. And, you know, in terms of the upstate and Spartanburg, they've both gone through rapid, you know, economic growth, and just like my hometown Charleston has. What are some of the likely challenges that Spartanburg and the upstate are going to face with gentrification and, you know, Black and brown folks having to move further out into the communities? And how do we sound the alarm on these issues?
Well, you know, I often talk about continuity of community. When you find the historical locations of certain neighborhoods, clearly you find a concentration of people of color. With that concentration over time, be it intentional through redlining or the opportunity for people based upon the history that we have pre-integration, communities have, you know, been concentrated with the highest numbers of minority and majority communities. With that, as communities are being redeveloped or gentrified, as we all recognize that, there becomes the very real possibilities of political power, people that can speak directly to issues being dissipated. As people are being moved out in different parts of the county, again, there's no continuity of community. You see this in Spartanburg, you see this in Greenville, Anderson, the entire upstate, 10 counties that we've had a chance to interact with. And so it's just trying to maintain that community, that sense of community, and also understanding that to have that economic viability, that political power, and of course, to know that, you know, we need to have a unified effort well beyond just those who have the opportunity, such as myself, the only person of color on county council during the time period in which I served, the only person of a certain political party, but clearly a person that was able to work to expand opportunities of affordable housing and to make sure that it was always on the forefront of any leadership as the community continued to develop.
And do you think, that's interesting, do you think that there's anything unique about the upstate that makes it different from the rest of the state in terms of how it needs to tackle environmental justice?
Well, you know, there are challenges. You could see clearly environmental issues that we've seen in recent times as it relates to, you know, our coastal areas, including the Midland with the extreme weather changes that have gone on. flooding, just differences in temperatures that can compromise certain economic aspects, in particular the way the vegetables and things that are produced. We always used to hear when I was growing up the potential peaches being affected by frost. Well, the impact of climate is real, and it does each and every year become more intense, as we see in the South. That can also, besides just economic factors, it can affect the health. As it gets hotter, people have to make certain decisions again, in terms of what they will face for their personal care. And of course, if your health is compromised, if you don't have healthy eating practices, if you're not in the best position in terms of where you're living may be not as energy efficient, there are challenges. And so as this area continues to grow and there's expanded economic options, because this is a heavy manufacturing area, and we're going gangbuster as it relates to the automotive industry. There are going to be additional challenges as we grow and as continuing developments of plants and the places where people are moving here and trying to expand and gain that upward mobility. There are going to be challenges to our infrastructure. There's going to be challenges to the quality of water. There's going to be challenges, obviously, to the quality of air that we have. And indeed, with just so many people that could be packed into an area with those challenges to the infrastructure, that's unique, I think, to the upstate and its ongoing burgeoning development.
And what gives you hope for the future of the upstate and for Spartanburg? What gives you hope? What do you look at and you say, this makes me hopeful about the future of both your organization, Sustaining Way, but also the future of the way we eat and the way we manage our food systems here in the upstate?
Well, just recently, the Herald Journal pointed out the fact that Spartanburg, the city proper, sits directly in the middle of the food desert. When you may have a 5-mile or more radius of a community of people that don't have the options of having healthy eating choices, don't have an option of the grocery store where they could go make those choices if they want to walk around that outside aisle where we know all the healthy food is located, or even options that are available in the grocery stores. When we know that based upon the conversations that are being held in terms of getting those options into the community, when you have organizations like Sustaining Way that operates principally in Nickeltown, but is an organization that is designed to expand and proliferate in other areas. Hopefully Spartanburg will be the next area. That leads to those conversations, to attack those negative indices when people don't have the chance to decide amongst themselves how they can engage in their own future in terms of healthy eating practices. Convenience stores, the type of fast food, those things proliferate within our communities, but having those choices to change just the outcome of which we look at for our health. Diabetes, heart disease, just all the negative things, obesity that continue to blight our communities. To have the opportunity to effectively and consistently impact that is the opportunity that we have in terms of the work that we're engaged in.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I know that we're going to get a lot of different questions in the next round just for you on the issue of food and food systems. Professor Corley, Professor Michael Corley, Michael and Michael, it's kind of confusing for me, but thank you so much, Professor Corley, for being here. Professor Corley is a special counsel for the South Carolina Environmental Law Project. He's director of the Lake Conestine Nature Preserve. He's professor of environmental law. He is way too modest, but I will say that, with his legal background, he's really used it to confront this legacy of industrial contamination, and he's really well known here in South Carolina. And so thank you so much, Professor Corley, for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I do appreciate the generous use of the professor moniker. I will say that the one class I teach is 2.5 hours long each class. So feel free to nudge me on our tight time limit we're working under today if I'm belaboring the point too much.
Don't worry. And you know what? I will tap into my legal background, and Michael Brown can tap into his as well. We'll make sure you keep on time. So my first question for you is, when can the legal system be used to address systemic or individual problems? When is it the most effective in terms of thinking about environmental justice?
Sure. Yeah. Well, of course, us lawyers that are on this this panel, we'd like to think that legal tools can be a complete answer to every problem, of course, right? But that's definitely not the case here, and that's because problems of environmental equity represent this complex convergence of issues. Like a good example is affordable housing and gentrification. So, like imagine a coal gasification plant like we have here in Greenville and in Columbia and Charleston and other cities across the country. When that coal gasification plant is operational, the surrounding community bears the brunt of the emissions, the water pollution, the hazardous waste. After that facility closes down, the community bears the brunt of, a festering brownfield that's sitting for decades unused as a blight. And then when the site is cleaned up, very often you see that site cleanup driving affordable housing crisis and gentrification forces. So that like the last insult to the community surrounding this facility is that like the benefits of the cleanup of this legacy contamination flow to someone else, right? So if I come in as a hotshot lawyer and I jump into the process and I help secure a cleanup of a contaminated site and I walk away, patting myself on the back, thinking what a good job I've done, as the historic residents of that community are getting uprooted, then that's clearly not an effective use of legal tools in this context. So what I would say to that is that when it comes to addressing these environmental equity issues, the law is one gear in the machine, right? The machine won't turn without the legal aspect, but just the law alone won't make the gears turn either. So I think it's a critical tool, but one that should be used in concert with many other stakeholders and experts.
Speaking of stakeholders, I'm on the board of Upstate Forever, and there seems to be this divide. Just being a Black person, when I hear the word environmental group or environment, I think hippies, trees, white people. That's just the way it is, right? I think just growing up in South Carolina, I instinctually think environmental group like that's just something for white people, right?
Sure.
And I think that that's the challenge for groups like Upstate Forever and other groups is that for a lot of these environmental groups that want to be helpful, they don't quite know how to be helpful. And so my question for you is, how can environmental groups such as Upstate Forever and others work most effectively with communities that are being negatively impacted by environmental justice issues?
Yeah, this is my favorite question because it gives me a chance to use an expression that I recently learned, all hat, no cattle. I don't know if you've ever heard that, Chris, but it's referring to a cowboy a person that walks around in a cowboy hat and all the trappings of a cowboy, but who's never roped a steer, right? Lots of talk and not much action. Despite my 40th birthday approaching very quickly, I still consider myself a youngish man, and just over the relatively limited time that I've been in the public interest environmental community, I've seen this big shift, right? And the shift I mean is like tons of us are now walking around in cowboy hats, right? And what I mean by that is like lots of us in the environmental community are now walking around quick to broadcast, environmental equity as a primary driver of our work. We're wearing the hat, but then the question that comes to me is, I wonder how many of us have the cattle to back it up, and this is a self-indictment, I can assure you, more than anything, because I have messed this up. I will fully confess that. I've experienced something in relation to my environmental justice and equity work that I've not experienced anywhere else. And usually when I show up in a community that's facing an environmental problem, and I say, hey, I'm an experienced environmental lawyer. I'm here to help solve your problem, and I will work for free. Usually that draws a very enthusiastic and universally positive reaction, right? I'm going to give you, tens of thousands of free legal work and help you solve your problem. But I've experienced from time to time when I do environmental equity work that when I show up and say, hey, I'm here to give you free legal advice and solve your problem, the reception sometimes can frankly, be a bit chilly. And, it took me a while to understand why that is, but, there's a real consequence to to that all hat, no cattle phenomenon. And that like the folks in these communities that are facing environmental equity issues, they develop an appropriate skepticism for folks that, to continue my analogy, a skepticism for folks that show up wearing cowboy hats, right? So regardless of how well-intentioned I am or someone like me is, it's not enough to show up in these communities and say, hey, trust me, I know what's best, and I'm going to solve your problem, even though that usually works, in other circumstances. So, given all those factors, and I think you're right on the money with that perception of environmental groups. Like, if an environmental group is really going to focus on environmental equity and justice as a meaningful part of their work, like, you can't just add that to your entry of organizational priorities, and just like you would wetland protection or some other issue, and then just continue on in your normal mode of operation, right? It requires a genuine shift in the way that a traditional environmental group operates in terms of really confronting these issues in a meaningful and a genuine way. Okay.
Now I got one more question for you, and then we're going to move on to Ms. James. But could you speak a little bit about Lake Conisty? And like, this was a highly contaminated site in a low-income community that was converted into green space. Could you talk a little bit about how that happened, and yeah, what are some of the lessons from that?
Sure. Yeah. So Lake Conisty, because of its location south of Greenville and our dam and some other factors, has received the contamination that's come down from Greenville. Since Greenville has had an industry. So within the bottom of the lake, there's just endless chemical pollutants and contaminants that would be hazardous to your health if you were to come into direct contact with those. And of course, continuing on the theme, all that contamination is built up in a community that was a mill community and has traditionally been a low-income area. And 20 or so years ago, the vision was created to take that contaminated lake bed and to turn it into a valuable environmental amenity for Greenville County and beyond. But really our mission there, and I think what's immediately valuable is taking the young Chris Richardsons of the world. We have an education.
I'm actually older than you.
Well, taking you in your childhood, and getting you out to Lake Conisty. So there's great value in Lake Conisty's accessibility, getting those young folks from divergent backgrounds in Greenville County out into a natural setting, breaking that, allowing those people to, those kids to see themselves as environmental scientists and engineers and maybe nonprofit environmental employees, right? And to change that perception and have those folks leave with a positive vision of what it means to be connected to the environment and nature, and then carry that out into the community. So it's a great success story, and it's a unique circumstance, but something that could be modeled to some degree in relation to some of these other contaminated sites.
That's great. And I just turned 40, and I'm going to tell you that it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just dip your toe into it. You'll be okay. Things move a little bit slower, but they still move. Miss James, Tiffany, how are you doing today? I'm sorry, Tiffany and I are old friends, and so I need to introduce her appropriately. But she's the founder of Justice James Consulting, and she worked on the recently successful Complete Streets policy with South Carolina Livable Communities Alliances. And she worked with the South Carolina Department of Transportation. And she was also one of the leaders of Mayor Pete's campaign, and is really a big influence here in South Carolina. And so Tiffany, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Complete Streets policy and why it was personally important for you?
Absolutely. And, I don't have this legal background like you all, but I do have a theatrical background. So I'll try not to be
It's the same. It's the same.
Oh, okay. It's the same.
Being a lawyer and being an actress is the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, Complete Streets is basically a multimodal approach to mobility, regardless of your age, your race, your income, your ability, or your mode of transportation. And this is so important because this is the first time in SCDOT's history that they've implemented, Complete Streets and acknowledge walking and biking as modes of transportation. Historically, it's only been, cars and trucks and public transit. but a heavy emphasis has been on cars. And I like to tell everybody, our mobility has been privatized. So this is a way to basically just have everybody, all users of transportation, able to enjoy their environments that they live in, and also have access to a better quality of life as well. So it's really exciting to see that SCDOT is righting the wrongs of SCDOT's history. We all know that many of the roads were funded to run through neighborhoods of colors. We know that, and they're mostly Redline neighborhoods. And so this is a great way for SCDOT to just put sidewalks and other accommodations for pedestrians and cyclists. So basically, that's the gist of the Complete Streets bill. The most exciting part to me is the council, the Complete Streets Council, which will comprise of like stakeholders, the SCDOT staff, NPO and COG staff, and external stakeholders such as civil rights groups like National Action Network, NAACP, Able South Carolina, just Eat Smart Move More. It's important to have their voices at the table because it helps with lifting up the voices that they serve on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important to me because I work with the community. I worked in transit, I worked in public transit for over 7 years. And I worked in community engagement, and I saw accessibility being an issue with people with people with disability, people of different income levels. Accessibility has been a huge issue with people of color. And when I think of rural areas like where my grandfather and my grandmother grew up at and where they're from in Plantersville, South Carolina, which is in the Low Country, I remember
it's in the middle of nowhere.
It is in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely. But cars would just fly by. And I just remember my grandfather taking his daily walks on these really busy streets. And thank God nothing ever happened to him. But not everybody has that story. African Americans make up 44% of the bicycle and pedestrian injuries and fatalities in South Carolina, and we're only 27% of the population. And so it's, they've been very fortunate to be able to walk in their neighborhoods without being hit or without being injured. And also the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, the people who ride public transit, just watching them walk miles and miles, and they have to choose between the ditch and the highway, so it's very important with the work that I do and the people that I serve. And so that's why it's a personal issue for me.
And that makes sense. And it's so connected to environmental justice, just the idea of us walking for miles and miles and being able to get out there. What do you think this policy means for Greenville, in particular, Greenville and Spartanburg? And do you think it can be replicated into other areas involving environmental justice?
Yes, I think it means the same thing to Greenville that it does for the rest of the state. But I will point out a particular road in Greenville, Whitehorse Road. I'm sure you all are familiar with Whitehorse Road, but there's been high pedestrian injuries and deaths on that road in the last decade. And there was a group of activists who got together back in 2018, and they had this event called Walk the Night. And what they did was they walked 9 miles on Whitehorse Road to raise awareness of the lack of infrastructure that's in place. There's people who come home from work and they walk miles and miles from the bus stop to their homes, and they are injured or they're killed on that road. So that would mean that roads like Whitehorse Road, whenever SCDOT has projects, road projects, that they will include accommodations like sidewalks and lighting and crosswalks and all the things that will contribute to, people going about their day-to-day lives. And also, I guess the second half of your question is, what does that mean for like other parts of environmental justice? So it relates to just that having better air quality. So we know that lower income neighborhoods, particularly Black and brown neighborhoods, children have high asthma rates. They have higher asthma rates than their white peers. And it's because more than likely they live next to highways. So when the highways was running through our neighborhoods, we got all the environmental harm, but we didn't get any of the accommodations to aid in our mobility. So when we have multimodal streets, more people will choose to walk, more people will choose to bike. They will have a choice, so they wouldn't have to use the vehicle if they have a vehicle. And people who don't have a vehicle can walk safely and bike safely without being harmed. So it will they will basically have lower vehicle emissions. So that means better air quality and better overall life quality.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I'm going to ask you a really quick question now. You work with Mayor Pete's campaign. Mayor Pete is now Department of Transportation Secretary. Every 4 years in South Carolina, Black folks are like treated like royalty. Is there a way to harness this power every 4 to 8 years because it seems like these candidates come in, they make a bunch of promises, and then they leave. How do we, as South Carolinians of all colors, capitalize? Like Tom Steyer spent like $20 million on this campaign. How can we make sure that Tom Steyer continues to spend money, not just on helping himself, but on helping Black folks and white folks here in South Carolina?
I say call them out. Call them out, like demand better. And a lot of people don't know what to demand. So I think political education and civic engagement and civic participation or civic education is very important. So it's about organizations like I mentioned, like NAN and NAACP and a lot of civic engagement organizations, just really educating people on candidates, what their roles are, and how they can raise their voices. So I would say call them out, call their offices, write op-eds. You're the king of op-eds. You like to call out the State Department, just like what you're doing, right? So I would say just continue to raise awareness and say, look, you can't just continue to come to our churches, come to our podiums and say, like, this is what I'm promising you. And then we don't hear anything back. So what we're going to do to keep you accountable, we're going to stay, stay calling you. We're going to stay nagging you. So I would say call them out and also keep them accountable by staying in touch with them and by being involved with organizations that are involved in policymaking and lobbying.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And be sure to tell Mayor Pete to come visit us again down here in South Carolina.
Right. He visited your church a year ago, I think.
That's right. It was a year ago. He was in my church. I don't think my minister's heard from him since, though. But that's another story.
That's another story.
We're going to switch to Iyonia. Hi, Iyonia. How are you doing?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing well. Just
Good.
Working in between patients, and I totally had the time confused, but I'm here.
Now, to introduce everyone to Iyonia, she is a community leader from New Washington Heights. New Washington Heights is one of the oldest African-American, if not the oldest African-American community in the Greenville area. That's undergone a lot of change. She's a U.S. Army veteran and a physical therapist assistant who has eloquently spoken about how the roads of New Washington Heights molded and nurtured her to be the person she is today. So thank you so much for being with us today. I guess my first question for you is, what are some of the larger ongoing issues that have been going on in New Washington Heights in terms of the environment?
Okay. What I've done, because I'm actually in the car, I jotted some notes down. So I don't know if could you guys still see me if I look at my notes or no?
Yeah, well, no, but it's fine. No, you go ahead and we'll make it work.
Okay, all right. So the things that are going on, since 2013, our community, we have been working on a master plan which is a plan that they have put in place to just do like a facelift of the community with improving homes or the owner occupants throughout the homes, the roadways, senior housing, park, shops, and some student housing as well. Alongside of that, our community partnered with Greenville County Redevelopment Authority, Furman University, United Way, and a various list of other sponsorship. Our community, you know, we went through 3 readings throughout the county council with this whole entire process of voting in new projects. And the readings all were voted upon as yes or with no opposition as well. So with the anticipation of this community receiving this facelift of the community, it never happened, it never took place. So in return of our master plan, our community was given a 60,000 square foot 10-bay garage bus maintenance facility, which is called Greenlink. Our county council, along with other high-ranking elected officials, agreed that that's you know, pretty much where they was going to put this whole entire maintenance garage facility. They were moving it from downtown Greenville and put it into our community. A 75-year-old community would be the best location to dump their project there, which is basically like a transportation system that mainly don't even cater to the Black community. And the majority of the Blacks that are receiving public transportation, they're having to walk 2 to 4 miles just to receive transportation from the public buses and stuff that run through there. So that's where we are having to fight and trying to push out of the community. But we get word that, hey, it's happening. There's pretty much nothing that we can do about it. So that's where we are with that.
Now, why is it important for you personally to be engaged and involved on the broader issues involving your neighborhood?
Oh, man, for many reasons. You know, my grandparents are helped build and shape this community. And just for the hard work of the Black community, just pulling together, and they worked hard in their community to keep their homes and, you know, to work. And it's always been a working class community. And just, I mean, I feel like it's my due diligence to pay that, you know, like I have to do something to help, because these are also the same people that have helped us grow along as children and help raise us. You know, they always say it takes a village to raise a child. And so this was my village that poured into my life, you know, so in return, it's my job to help save our community. And so I think just personally being engaged and involved in it for various reasons, where there's, you know, complexity of issues that's given within the community, basically where a traditional approach, and it, you know, it hasn't been as effective as it needs to be within the community. Just that traditional, oh yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that and stuff or whatever, because there's so many broken promises that has, you know, come throughout the community. And oh, we're going to do this for the community, we're going to do that for the community, and nothing ever takes place. So, you know, it's just,
when you hear the words environmental racism, what does that mean to you? When you hear those words, environmental racism?
I think of toxic waste, a waste dump in minority communities. I think of hazardous material put into the environment that will threaten the quality of life of minority individuals. And, you know, I really have been doing a lot of digging and just searching the term environmental racism. And I've seen, you know, where it refers to how the minority groups of neighborhoods are populated and primarily by people of color and members of low socioeconomic backgrounds are burdened with disproportionate numbers of hazards, including toxic waste facilities, garbage dumps, and other sources of environmental pollutions, foul odors, which also this, you know, it lowers the quality of life, and it links to cancer and various other diseases, whether it's COPD, congestive heart failures, all these things. And with African Americans being, you know, the always the highest at any disease that it is, you know, like these are the things that are basically fed to the African American community. So there's no way to combat it, whether it's change of lifestyle, change of, you know, exercise and all that stuff. I mean, it's still that toxin from the environmental racism that's going to be fed into communities throughout the entire world.
And what are, you know, we often talk about the struggles of Black folks, and I don't know we necessarily always talk about the successes of Black folks. What are some of the success stories that you've seen in New Washington Heights? And what do you think that we all can learn from them? What are some of the things you've seen that have been successful?
I've seen where there has been a high increase of student graduation, where they attend high school and they graduate high school, and not just you know, obtaining the GED. That most of everyone that I went to school with within my cohort graduated with a high school diploma. I mean, everyone. So that's a lot of us, and they're all very successful within careers or whatever they chose to do throughout life. So it's not, you know, oh, this community where it's just thugs and drug dealers and all this stuff or whatever. It's a community that, you know, has groomed great leaders, and college students as well with college degrees and things like that. So I think that's a big plus, because we all, like, the Black community is always, it has the stigma of, oh yeah, it's a bad community, you know, a lot of high school dropouts and things of that. So I think that's the biggest success, because education is always important.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that I think that feeds back into what Professor Corley was saying earlier about how a lot of white folks have this white saviorism idea that they're going to come in and save Black people from whatever harms white people are also giving to Black people. And it's just fascinating that I think that we don't talk enough about the successes of all of us working together. And so I'm going to open it up now to a few questions that I've gotten, and anybody else can jump in. So the first question, or any of the panelists rather, can jump in. The first question that we have is there a plan for Spartanburg Southside to bring a needed food market to that area? The person is aware that there's been much talk regarding this, but they want to know where is the action? I think Councilman Brown can speak to that.
I know that the representatives on that side of town, in particular with City Council, as well as city staff itself, they are working diligently on the plan. I know there has been some interest. Clearly, there has, you know, in recent times there's been some changes with two chains of grocery stores. Can't say what they are, but I can leave some things to your imagination. So, with that being said, there are ongoing conversations, but there is a concerted plan, as I understand it, for some funding to kind of help those things out, as well as bringing in some other interested potential grocers.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we have is, what is the update on the Viva recycling site in Anderson, South Carolina, which is adjacent to the Homeland Park that caught on fire about a year ago? Does anybody know about that, or what's been going on with that?
I can speak to that a little bit. I do know that those tire sites are on DHEC's radar. There's a specific group that works specifically on tires and major tire messes, disasters, and there is money. There's a tire trust fund from the fees we pay on tires to clean these things up when they get out of hand. So I know that's being worked on. It might be a slow process. The DHEC first tries to get an entity who is responsible to pay for it before they commit state funds to it. So I do know that.
And does anybody know what is the conversation on Superfund sites in general in South Carolina? And how are we going to make corporations responsible through legislation? Or is there any look at that currently?
I could talk to that one again real quick. On a particular bill that we're working on, for example, it's the pyrolysis bill S525. We want it amended because it's a new, potentially, you know, it could wind up being a dump. It could wind up being a problem. We are pushing to get it amended to make sure that there are financial assurances And then Senator Johnson, I think, also may have an amendment to make sure those facilities aren't located in historically disadvantaged communities. So we're going to be seeing more and more of that kind of thing.
Okay. This question, is what would you encourage a 70-year-old white man from East Greenville to do to help this focus, other than leave his Stetson hat at home? Professor Corley or Michael Brown or Tiffany or Ionia, what do you think could encourage a 70-year-old white man to get involved in environmental justice?
Well, I can say from the standpoint of someone who's involved in running a nonprofit, despite our best intentions, we sometimes find ourselves responding to the issues that are relevant to our members and donors. So to the extent that you're a stakeholder and a member and a donor of a nonprofit, you have the ability to drive the focus of that organization in a way that just good intentions can't do. So I think the way that you really make significant change on that front is that there's an uprising among the kind of typical folks that support our kind of organization to say, this is not something that we just want lip service paid to. This is something we want to shape the nature of this organization.
Tiffany or Ionia, what do you think? How can we get our 70-year-old white man to get involved in environmental justice?
You wanted to go, Tiffany?
Yeah, I'll just say this briefly. I would say, look at what matters to you the most. Think about your lifetime, what you lived through and what you would like to see change. So if you lived in an area and there are factories growing up, and you know that it's affected your community, you can think about, the children who are growing up now and, what they may be going through. So just think of things that's happened in your life, whether it has to do with land, air, or water, and look at organizations that are focused on those issues and get involved. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
And just to piggyback off of Tiffany, is just like getting involved and actually going out into the community and help spread the word of mouth about the issues. Because I think the biggest thing is that the media kind of controls the narrative of the thing, and with our community in itself, it's kind of like a friendly tag game, and it's really not that within the community in itself. It's just like, oh yeah, the community don't, and and Green Lake's going to do X, Y, and Z. So it's just actually getting out there and pushing the truth within the community of itself. I mean, given that is a minority community, so funding is very limited as far as us being able to control our own narrative.
Okay.
I would join in with all three and just say simply get involved, understanding that there are groups such as Sustaining Way that directly also works on the opportunity to advocate certain aspects of environmental justice. We've had in recent times specifically the ability to stop one of our, in fact, the leading energy provider in this area from enacting unfortunate but the reality is always there, rate hikes. And so we were involved in that. So just give us an opportunity to talk with you. Come out and visit us at 60 Baxter Street so you can see what we're doing.
Perfect. And well, another question we got is environmental justice requires private and public partnerships, which is very true. How can we encourage private investors to improve communities without those private investors wanting to exploit them? Does anyone want? I guess no one wants to jump in on that one because they don't know how that's possible. But I'm going to give it to Professor Corley.
Oh man, don't hand me that hot potato. If we could figure out the answer to that question, then we could we could solve a lot of problems. I mean, there are the great thing about it that I've seen in Greenville County at least is that our local government and the city and the county are providing mechanisms and incentives to drive that private investment and private action, because the truth of the matter is that it's the rare, corporate entity, private entity that's going to act just out of a desire to do good. So I think that is a place where politics and the power of government to put those incentives in place is really what has to make that push. At least that's been my experience. I wish I was less cynical, but that's what I've found.
You're too young to be cynical. We still have to have hope. Another question that we have is, will Spartanburg consider doing worker-user food cooperative, a worker-user food cooperative?
As I understand it, that's I guess a values-driven type of business where the workers actually own a stake in it. What I can say is there was previously a cooperative grocery store that was owned in downtown Spartanburg. The unfortunate part, just with the reality of the growth of Spartanburg, is it was there just before there were a number of developments that were specifically located in the heart of downtown. And so I think that, it's a perfect opportunity for another one to come in the area. So I'm sure Spartanburg would also take a look at it. It was funding that was provided by the city, but with the combination of the potential grocery store on the south side, as well as the previous location of the co-op, they would be very close. So I think either one of them are very doable.
Okay. And I guess for all of our panelists, who are some political leaders that you believe have been helpful on this issue of environmental justice? And also, like, given South Carolina's outsized influence in politics, such as with Jim Clyburn, who are some of the leaders that have been really at the forefront of the environmental justice movement?
I will just say one that comes to mind is Representative Marvin Pendarvis. So he sponsored a bill in 2019, the Complete Streets bill. So he pre-filed that in 2019, and we basically had like I think it was a subcommittee hearing on it. It didn't get past that, but I applaud him for those efforts. We definitely couldn't get the Complete Streets policy passed with the SCDOT internally without him pushing, at the state house level. So I'm very, very thankful for him, and for him not acknowledging that Complete Streets is the way of the future, not just for mobility, but also for better air quality as well. So that's who sticks out for me.
Okay. And I'm gonna ask a couple more questions, and then I know we have to go, but someone asked, government seems to take so long oftentimes, and they don't really listen really well to the concerns of people. And so many community projects require money. How can young college students who are poor by definition, or relatively poor, how can we get them involved, and what can they do?
I guess I'll go ahead and answer that question. So I would say the young college student can do the same thing that I suggested for the 70-year-old white male. Basically just find what organization is, interests you, what environmental justice organization interests you, and get involved. We have technology at our fingertips. We can just Google, the areas that we're interested in, and give them a call, find them on social media, go to an event, get the word out with your peers. There's several ways you can get involved. So I would say it's the same exact thing that I said to the 70-year-old.
And because the young person does reference the government, I would also say that clearly supporting organizations, as Tiffany has just said, that's fundamental first and foremost. But also you have a chance to hone your skills and have the opportunity to talk to people that actually influence policy. There are a number of organizations, a number of opportunities, a number of committees that you can join with local government, so you can directly engage. And of course, you can always check the schedule because Zoom now has made it so very easy for people to see what's going on with local government, for you to engage those platforms and to actually have conversations directly with those people that represent you. Because public dollars are involved in a number of projects, even if there is private partnerships. But as a taxpayer, you do have the ability and you do have the need to get involved and say something.
And I'm gonna just close it by saying, you know, if you're a young person wanting to get involved, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Be comfortable with, you know, not being everyone's friend, and be comfortable with speaking truth to power. A lot of people aren't going to like you for it, but sometimes it's necessary and warranted. And don't worry about speaking truth and power to me. Speak more to the people in your environment and your community, because often they're the ones that need to hear that stuff more than I do, or more than these neighborhoods do. And so thanks everyone for doing this. This was a wonderful event. I'm so sorry that we're out of time. I hope we can do this again. For those who want to know, we're going to be following up with a list of resources and upcoming events through Upstate Forever and other organizations. And we're really looking forward to continuing this conversation for the future. And so thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, let's do this again. We'll make sure this is the first, but it won't be the last. Thanks, everybody.